Hey, everybody, it's the People Soup Show, and we are here. It is Wednesday. I still can't, it's like summer is here, so I don't know what day it is, but it is Wednesday. It is June. It is the 24th, and it is year 2026. And we're here in person, live and in person, coming at you through the interwebs with the one, the only Avery Alder. How are you doing, Avery?
Hey, I am doing good. Yeah. How are you guys doing?
Doing fine. Hafiz, how are you today?
I'm doing awesome. I'm super excited today that we have Avery on. We
Why?
had the one, we had the chance to bump into one another at Breakout Con, and Avery kindly autographed my copy of The Quiet Place. The other is as a former geography teacher and someone who does a lot of teacher PDs, I introduced the deep forest to a bunch of geography teachers at a conference, and we were all just kind of like collectively talking about how awesome it was. And then I bump into Avery at Breakout. I'm like, oh my God. And I kind of nerded out and I think just ran up to you and was just like, can I have your autograph? So now we're friends and we're all on the show together and we can talk some more.
So you got Avery to sign a
No,
DVD?
nope. Copy of the game.
I'm kidding. You called it The Quiet Place,
Oh,
which
sorry,
is a
not the Quiet
movie.
Place. Yeah, I'm overly excited and I
Yeah,
should
it's
do that
okay.
next time. Next time I see you, I'm going to bring a copy of the Quiet Place and I'm going to get you to autograph it for me.
Perfect.
So yeah, I mean, Avery is a superstar, obviously, in the world of RPGs, and really, Avery, I think, out of the plethora of designers, you're one of the people who kind of ushered in sort of like a new era of like indie RPG design that was very, 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 very far away from trad RPGs, D20 systems, the Dragon game, all that kind of stuff. Um, and what was that? What was that like? Kind of being on the literal bleeding edge of indie RPGs. Maybe what was it like? I don't know. How long ago was that? 15 years ago, I want to say 14, 12. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends when you consider that groundbreaking ushering to have happened.
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like I just had the privilege of getting into design at a time when people were really generous and open with their knowledge and their process. People at the Forge and Story Games. And I learned a lot from people like John Harper, Vincent and McGay Baker, Jonathan Walton, especially people in the Pacific Northwest. I spent a lot of time at little conventions like Go Play, Maelstrom, Fabricated Realities. And I honestly just feel like my design work benefited so much from just being around the right people and getting into design at the right time and having kind of like having my brain kind of broken wide open by a lot of the indie games that were coming out of the Forge at the time, especially things like My Life with Master, Shock, social science fiction. Those are the two I point to as like those were the first indie games I bought, and they completely changed my understanding of what role playing games could be. Um, and since then, I don't know. I've just been trying to continue to contribute to that same kind of like Forgeite story games tradition.
That's excellent. And I think I was a little bit after you in that. Like I really sort of had my eyes opened wide again with Powered by the Apocalypse type systems, kids on bikes, just things that were a little bit, kids on bikes is actually quite similar in many ways to trad RPGs, but it takes a lot of influences from indie story games for other things. And so I think it was kind of this hybrid thing that worked really well. But all the like Apocalypse World and things like that was very much this eye opening point for me of like, what even is this? Like, where are we going with this? How does this work? When you're so used to like, you know, not being fiction first, not being led by the fiction. And I think that whole switch around to narrative leading the game, and even player agency and seating narrative control and all these things that are part of more of the story gaming scene, I think was just a real big, powerful moment in time for me as well. And um, the Quiet Years definitely part of that. Uh, in that, I think Jonathan Gilmour and I sat at a table um, for like 3 hours, 4 hours, playing that game with a couple other people, and it was just like, this is wild. This is just so interesting that you could get so much out of ostensibly not a lot. Like there's not a lot of meat on those bones. Why? Because the players provide all the meat, right? And I thought that was such a neat thing when you're so used to RPGs being like tome after tome after tome after tome, and this little booklet and a deck of cards and some skull tokens really, pushes your storytelling and your role playing really to like that next level, which I thought was really really cool. What's your first experience with role playing, Hafiz? Actually, I don't. I've never actually talked to you about RPGs before.
Yeah, it's relatively new. My brother was getting really into D&D, and then the pandemic hit, and he's like, "Okay, we are all going to start playing online," and it was just a way for us to stay connected with our friends from junior high, and so we ended up having like a 4 year long campaign that he was running that he designed himself. Um, and the more he got into it, him and I, we were in one another's bubbles, and so we would chat with one another all the time. So I would get it through him and his excitement of what was going on. And at the end of every game that we'd play, we'd all go around and share our memorable moment, which is something weird or wacky or funny that happened. And those were always just the most fun parts because it was the parts that we contributed to what was going on. Yeah, there was a plan in mind, but we did this weird, wacky, unexpected thing, which ended up having hilarious consequences. And I think that's the part that all of us enjoyed the most. So when you're talking about how something like The Quiet Year has the players be the ones that construct the majority of the story, like it's the thing that I find fascinating about that in the Deep Forest is how minimal the components are. Like the box is like that big for that game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that for me, what I love about role playing games is that childlike opportunity to engage in make believe, and I think part of my perspective or philosophy on game design is like we we already know how to tell stories, and we already love telling stories, and we all already innately have that ability within us. We just have convinced ourselves to stop because we're quote unquote not good at it, or
Mm.
we're grown-ups now or whatever. And role playing games just need to give mostly that sense of permission to we can start make believing things again. um, and then it needs to provide a little bit of scaffolding. um, and honestly, a lot of the games that I've designed have been exercises in, well, just how little scaffolding do you need? Like, and often it's a vibe, some inspiring art, and about 16 pages of text.
Yeah, it's perfect for like a zine, right? To get that level of just enough to be something. And I really do appreciate a lot of those minimal style games that don't have all the bells and whistles, that don't have this, lavishly built world, because again, it lets the players do a lot of the fun part, actually, which is creating all that stuff, right? Or living in it, or describing it and then living in it, and then co-creating it with the other players, or with a GM who is going to take what you say and make it something bigger than that. Oh, hey, we skipped a whole bunch of stuff because we just started talking about games. But welcome, Avery, to the show. And also, we'd like to know your origin story here at the Maple Syrup Show. We want to know what got you into games, what got you into game design, And what was baby Avery like in terms of gaming and game culture and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, baby Avery was very impatient and very talkative and wanted to dive in and tell stories right away. And my first encounter with role playing games in any kind of like formal structured sense was Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. And I was in high school at the time, and myself and all of my friends at the time were uh, cynical, critical, know it all nerds. And when we sat down to play Dungeons and Dragons, I don't remember who attempted to run it first, but someone attempted to run it. We played through one session, and at the end, everyone just sat around and complained about how much it sucked and how much this person had gotten dungeon mastering wrong and just really fundamentally misunderstood the game in some way. I feel like so much of role playing game design, especially at the time, was like you kind of just needed someone to show you how to do it, because the "what is role playing" section, where the text is like it's like cops and robbers, but there's rules. Like it was always the exact same boilerplate that was completely useless. And how you actually do role playing was kind of this folk tradition.
Yeah, it
It
was like
wasn't
word of
any
mouth,
of the
right?
free expensive books that you had to buy. Um, so someone tried to run Dungeons and Dragons. Everyone complained, said you're doing it wrong. And then that person was like, fine, if you think you understand the true way to play Dungeons and Dragons, why don't you run it? And then that person would run it for one session, and then we'd all complain. And then I would run it for one session, and then everyone would complain. Um, I, of course, was like, let's tell complex political stories about the gnome and minotaur alliances as oppressed like subclasses with wildly diverging experiences from one another. And people are like, what are we supposed to kill? And I'm like, nothing. Listen to my ideas for longer. Um, but we kind of just took turns tearing one another down because we all had a different idea of what Dungeons and Dragons was supposed to be.
Mhm.
And I think part of that is because Dungeons and Dragons makes a lot of promises to a lot of different people about the experience they're going to get out of it. And those promises can't be reconciled with one another necessarily. Um, so I had a lot of frustration in my opening experiences with role playing. And I think a sane, rational response would have been to say, huh, I guess role playing games aren't for me. And a baffling, bizarre response would be to say, I'm going to dive down the deepest internet rabbit holes that I can possibly find trying to deconstruct how role playing game design works. And I'm going to get deeply invested in role playing game design and design my own games that circumvent the problems that I'm experiencing with Dungeons and Dragons. And that's the path that I chose. And then I happened to be really fortunate, like I was kind of alluding to earlier. I connected with people at the Forge. I was exposed to works like My Life with Master by Paul Sega, Shock by Joshua A.C. Newman. Um, yeah, just some really groundbreaking indie story games. And um, those were kind of my first design inspiration sources. My first game was D&D 3.5, but I never really learned how to play it. I still don't really understand how to play D&D. People all the time were like, "Oh, you do role-playing games. You should run D&D for me and my friends." And I'm like, I have made a career of avoiding learning how to play that game, actually.
I think it's funny because D&D in offering so much, and promising so many things, and now we just see like apparently, guys, Vampire the Masquerade, which is its own role-playing system, is now getting ported into 5.5e, and there's going to be a vampire class that you can play in Dungeons
Oh.
and Dragons, which is bizarre and weird and very meta. But also, that's what I like about the indie games is they promise you one thing with one really good experience that's going to happen within, maybe one session, maybe a couple sessions, maybe a short little micro campaign, but you're going to get there, and it's so heavily focused on that one thing that you get it. where I find a lot of times, yeah, D&D ends up either we're always like in the tavern, and that's it, or we're, murder hobos. That trope is very played out. And it's the funniest thing. Like I always just wanted to like use magic in weird ways. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't want to cast fireball. I wanted to see what can I do with this, weird spell. Like, how can I use this weird spell in a creative way? And I think because I started playing when I was very, very young, like 6, um, none of the dungeon masters, because they were all like college age people. I don't think they could handle that. I don't think they were liking what I was doing. But now that a lot of the indie games, they will cater to that. Do you want this specific experience? Well, then play this game. And I think that's kind of the power of those indie games. They distill, an experience, a core experience into one game and a system that is keyed to that experience versus Dungeons and Dragons, which is, mostly power fantasy and quite dilute, and quite broad. And that's okay. There's lots you can do with it. I get that. I just don't have time for it. That's the other thing. I just don't have time. I have time for like one shots. That's what I like. Oh, okay. So you started with D&D, still don't really know how to play it, and now you're deeply, deeply invested in, um, learning some of the, very seminal, story games, and you start designing your own. What did you start designing? And was your first thing that you was the first thing that you started designing? Have any of us ever seen it, or is it like in like some shoebox and you went to the next thing and the next thing?
Um, the second thing I designed made its way into print and was the first thing that I actually brought to Gen Con. The first thing I designed was like a really generic task resolution based, you're cool guys in the post apocalypse kind of game. And that was actually for a school assignment. I grew up in a really small rural logging town, and my town had very little to offer me, and my school in particular had very little to offer me in a lot of ways. But one thing it did offer was this design your own course. Where you could decide what you wanted to learn, put together a project proposal, be like, here's what I'm going to learn. Here's how I'm going to show proof of learning at the end of the semester. Here's what I'm going to present to be evaluated on. Here's how I'm going to spend my time. And I decided one semester to do role-playing game design. And so that was actually my first thing that I ever designed, was a class project, basically, for my class of 1. Um, and then I took that same course again next semester and did role-playing game publishing. And my final project was actually bringing to print my second ever design project. And so that was Perfect, which later was revised into a second edition called Perfect Unrevised. And that was a kind of dark Victorian dystopian game where you play criminals who are willing to risk very probable capture and kind of brainwashing and reconditioning because there's something you care about. Um, and so it was kind of like a what's worth having your whole world torn apart for.
Hmm.
That was that game. And mechanically, I think that the really interesting thing, the starting point for that design was exploring what would it be like if a character sheet only told you things that you can't do instead of things that you
Mm.
can do.
Very cool. And so that was young Avery, not baby Avery, but young Avery. And at the age of 17, 18, you took that to Gen Con?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. As part of the school project.
Well, Gen Con was in the summer, so school is out. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
actually, like finishing the book was actually part of like I got school credit for that.
Right. And so have you always had an entrepreneurial streak? Or is it just like part and parcel of this, I guess, if I've got to do this myself kind of thing.
I picked my plums from my backyard and brought them to the farmer's market every Sunday when I was 10 years old.
So
I made
yes,
dollars,
dollars
several
and dollars
dollars.
of dollars. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Um, and you've carried on this kind of entrepreneurial streak into today. Avery, who is neither young or baby, but is Avery now Avery. And so I wanted to talk to you about your book that is upcoming called Game Design for Creatures. And before we get there, I actually wanted to talk to you about your courses, your instructional courses. So I've seen them offered in various places, and I always tell people, oh, if you're there, you should go. Avery's awesome. What happens at an Avery Alder course?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the course, I guess. I, yeah, so I've been designing games for 2 decades at this point. And I, in addition to designing games, have always loved teaching. Um, I've always loved teaching, I've always loved presenting. And so beginning to do workshops just felt like a natural extension of my game design work at a certain point. I was really lucky actually to be contacted by a space called Tatamagouche Center, which is in rural Nova Scotia. And the executive director at the time, now a dear friend of mine named Josie Baker, um, was a role playing game nerd who happened to be the executive director of a retreat center, and was like, "Hey, we should get some funding, and we should fly you out here, and we should have you offer a role playing game design like 3 day intensive at our center." And so that first kind of major, bigger than 3 or 4 hour workshop opportunity really just got dropped into my lap. Uh, really fortunate in that way. But I did it, and it just felt like such a magical experience. So that one was called uh, Liberatory Story and Play. And it was just like looking at role playing games as a site of potential personal and collective transformation. I ran a second one about running role playing games, and then it was the third one. So this is kind of like one a year at that point. So the third one, and maybe in 2017, um, which was called Designing Games That Matter, and this was a 5 day game design intensive, and uh, part of the time is spent just kind of like sculpting the space, right? Like making sure that we have a container wherein everyone feels um, safe, free, they're at their most expressive and empowered. Um, the more I've run workshops, the more I've realized that the urge to get as much content packed into the time as possible is a trap. And you actually want to spend like 20% of your time building the container, the space, making sure people feel like loose and comfortable within the space. Um, 10% of your time introducing new material, 40% of your time kind of like practicing it, and the rest is snacks and breaks. Like you really don't want to be trying to overload your agendas. And so one of the things that those Designing Games That Matter 5 day intensives, over time, based on feedback, I started to do a lot more of was just having time to like, I'm going to teach some really critical, important concepts. We're going to put them into play in a design lab. And then we're also just going to have like after the snack, we're going to have just time to talk about what we designed, to debrief, and also just to chat. Because that's actually where a lot of the integration happens. Uh, so you ask what happens, and I'm like, I don't know. Most of it is chill. But the actual answer is that we talk about the idea of getting games from initial concept to actually playing as quickly as possible. And then
Right.
we do a design lab that puts that into practice. And then we talk about how to do rapid iteration, how to do targeted playtesting, like playtesting a specific mechanic or a specific part of a narrative arc or something like that. And then we do a design lab that puts that into process. We talk about designing things that are personal and political, and then we do a design lab to put that into practice. And so a lot of the workshops that I run are like, I'm going to talk for 10 minutes. I'm going to load a bunch of concepts that I think are really important onto you. And then we're going to go do a weird, wacky design lab for like 3, 4 hours, um, and give you a chance to actually uh, muck around with really designing and playtesting something. We go over, here's how you play Storm, or how scroll 20 words onto index cards in Sharpie and then grab some dice and just start vibing it out and figuring it out and designing as you play. And that's a big part of the process. Because I think that a lot of the time, for those workshops, the people who show up, some of them have never designed something before, but some have spent the last 20 years designing something that they have never play tested.
Right.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And they're they're in their wizard's tower, they're polishing a manuscript, but it's not, I feel like they've been doing a manuscript mock-up, but they haven't really been doing game design, because
Hmm.
game design exists at the table and it exists in play.
Yes, I
And
agree. I agree.
that's that feedback loop of playing and tweaking is game design.
Yes, the
I love
iteration,
that.
right?
And that idea of there's moments of play, but then there's these organic moments that you're building in. It's not everything's overly structured, but that moment where someone is just having a snack and chatting with someone else can lead to a really profound insight into something you're thinking about. Because I think when we're on all the time, we're expected to be doing something all the time, it makes it difficult to see the thing that might be right in front of us.
It's why I take so many showers. Because I think a lot in the shower, right? Because there's nothing else. It's white noise. My kids won't bother me. It's a great time to like think about things. But
It's a great thinking
um,
space.
yeah, it's a great thinking space. But also, who does come to these types of retreats? Like you said, sometimes they've never designed anything. Sometimes these people who have designed the same thing for 20 years without testing it. Who does show up at a 3 or 5 day intensive game design retreat in Nova Scotia of all places?
Yeah, I mean, nerds in the Maritimes mostly,
Right?
but a lot of times people have driven up from from Maine or from New
Yeah,
York or
okay.
something
That
like
makes
that,
sense.
and people have come over from like Toronto. I don't think ever farther west than Toronto for rural Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Mm,
That's interesting. That's
but
what? It's funny. That's all I ever wanted, right? Is a space. I just
yeah,
need a space to do things. My wife and I are talking about buying a resort, not like a resort like fancy, but like a Canadian resort. We're all
yeah,
Canadians, so we know what we mean by a couple cabins, a main space for
a
cooking and
summer camp.
eating. Yeah, summer camp, but
Yeah,
just for retreats and design, writing. We're both My wife and I are both therapists, like therapy retreats, that kind of thing.
yeah.
So that's all I've ever wanted. So hearing that is where you were doing things, that's super awesome. Um,
And creating that space also creates that permission that Avery was talking about before too.
yeah,
It's like, hey,
Yeah.
this is a dedicated area where we can all come together under this common interest and this curiosity, and we're just going to create. And no, you talked a lot about like building that container, and I'm assuming part of that's also just like that we're not judging here. We'll give feedback and constructive feedback, but this is a space where we all are excited about and interested in games. I'm actually wondering about something because you talked about how you set the tone for these courses. Do you dive into some of the the considerations that tend to not get brought up very often? So the board game design is kind of an art form, and all art forms, in some sense, are political. But a lot of times, people don't want to either acknowledge or talk about that. In fact, when Sen and I invite people, we have a question: "What don't you want to talk about?" And we do get people saying, "No politics." Um, does that come up when you are setting the tone for what people can be exploring? And what they should be thinking about when they're doing their game design?
Yeah, I actually just ran another workshop recently at the University of Alberta, just a 4 hour design workshop, and it was a 10 to 2 workshop, and so we have lunch in the middle. And after having like designed it, and I ran it twice, but after the first time I ran it, looking at my agenda, I was like realizing that, oh, the morning, the first 2 hours, the theme is so clearly game design isn't that serious. And
Mm.
then after lunch, the theme is so clearly actually game design is more serious than you came in thinking. And like both are true in their own ways. Um, right. That it's not so serious as in the best way to design games is to just throw some stuff together and get together with your friends and see if it works. To have a much more fast and loose, low stakes, just muck about and just play around kind of approach to design. And then in the afternoon of that workshop, we're coming back and we're saying, okay, that is true and that is a good process, but also let's talk about the fact that game mechanics are political. And when we put together game systems, especially role playing game systems, what we're doing is we're making political assertions and then we're inviting people to play within the world constructed out of those political assertions. And the reason that I say that game mechanics are political is that game mechanics, what they're doing is they're providing a model of causality, of agency, and of power. Right? They're saying this is how characters succeed or fail in the world. These are the kinds of things that influence outcomes for better or for worse. This is how cause and effect works. These are the things worth tracking. And implicitly, inversely, these are the things not worth tracking. Here are the people who are important, and here's how they are important, and here's how they succeed or fail. Um, Statements about causality, agency, and power are political statements. And so, um, even when we're designing and playing games that are about laser space elves doing cool backflips on the moon, we're still constructing the rules of the game in a way that's making a lot of those exact same assertions about power, about causality, and about agency. And so we talk about that. We talk about the fact that game mechanics are political. We talk about the fact that it behooves us to notice whose politics we're writing into and then, reifying and making invisible into our games, and challenging ourselves to like be intentional about that process. Um, because those assertions are going to be political one way or the other. And are they just reinforcing status quo ideas about power, or are they shaking things up and doing something interesting?
Are board games in the sense like sci-fi? Like so much of science fiction is about weird, messed up things that are happening in the world today. But if we can't talk about it the way it is now, but we can talk about it as a future place, an elsewhere place, various creatures, and then it becomes palatable. Do you think games can also serve that purpose?
Yeah, I feel like we're making engaging with the world um, simpler, smaller. We're providing a sandbox to try things out and experiment. Uh, for people to get their hands dirty and see what happens. In a world where increasingly, I think people feel like information paralysis, and people feel like the world is too complicated and too hard. Uh, we're saying like you can engage with those same hard things in a way that actually feels fun or light. Um, so yeah,
I think there's a lot of really, people wanting to be apolitical, without recognizing that, to say all art is political is not far from the truth. It's a little bit of, lip service to it, because I think you should do a little bit better than that and actually talk about what those political things are. But it sort of goes back to the whole 5e thing, right? It's just really weird that 5e in offering everything says nothing in a lot of ways. I find, anyways. I think individual creators or individual stories within using 5e can do things about politics and whatnot, but not to the same degree and not maybe with the same intentionality and design, um like chops isn't the right word, but it's like when you pull back the veil on a really well designed indie game that has a political statement attached to it, you can see it, you can feel it in the decisions that the designer made. And 5e doesn't do that, right? Or D&D in general does not do that. And if it does anything, it's really just perpetuating, again, power fantasy of, kill things, get rich, get better, be bigger, all that kind of stuff, which was it's fun, but I don't know if it's really saying much. Um, and in not saying much, maybe it is saying actually something about that generation, or that the people who made it, or the stories they grew up hearing and telling, and things like that. So it is interesting to think about. um
Yeah,
hey.
I mean, I think that with D&D in particular, I feel like so much of the politics baked into the core mechanics from its origins, like it's derived from war games. It is a game about conquest. It is an extractivist game about killing things and taking their stuff. It is a, it reinforces a lot of colonial ideas, and in a lot of ways, over the development between editions, and I think we're seeing it a lot in D&D 5 era, the designers are doing a lot of work to like ameliorate the politics inherent in the mechanics, which I think is probably the right. It's probably the right choice to be doing. Right, to be like,
Mhm.
let's portray orcs as having interesting, interesting and real and whole cultures, and family units, that and you know diversity of experiences within their culture. Like, let's get farther away from this like uh, racist caricature from which orcs are derived. But like, that's all work to like rehabilitate the politics that are already baked into the game. Um, and so I think that D&D is striving to be apolitical, but like in a different way than people mean. I think they're like, I think that Wizards is actively working to do damage control on the inherent politics of the game.
Yeah, I mean, Wizards is going to have to do a lot more damage control after their latest announcements, but that's neither here nor there. That's for a whole other show. So, tell us a little bit more about game design for creatures. Who are these creatures, and why are they designing games, Avery?
Great question. Yeah. So I mentioned that I've been designing games for 2 decades. I've been doing a lot of consulting, mentorship, teaching along the way. And especially in the consulting work that I was doing, I kept noticing that I was relaying the exact same advice in a lot of cases to almost everyone I was doing consulting for. Um, whether those were seasoned designers or first-time designers, I was I was doing a lot of, okay, well, there's whole sections I can just copy paste from the last report. And once I realized, like, I'm kind of being paid a lot of money to repeat the same ideas over and over again, uh, the kind of the natural step forward from that is I should really be gathering these ideas together into a book. Um, and so game design for creatures kind of emerged from feeling like, oh, I am well rehearsed in the things that I feel are important to say about game design generally. I'm well rehearsed from teaching throughout the years and from consulting. Um, and um, and I've been putting that into practice a long time in my own design work. And so one of the core ideas for game design for creatures is that kind of concept I was talking about earlier, that like design happens through play. These are games, games are played. Game design should be a play based and curiosity led experience as well. One of the other ideas, and the reason that that creatures title came about, is starting from the premise that um, we are creatures, we are animals, and when our game design uh, wholly integrates that and starts from that premise, starts from that premise that like the primary medium the role playing games operate on is the human body. Um, then I think our design becomes more accessible, more approachable, more personal, more powerful, and more interesting and more weird. Um, and so I think that comes up in a lot of different ways, kind of throughout the book. But those are kind of the two core premises: is like you should be designing through play, and you should be designing outward from your body.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because that's really interesting. Like outward from your body. What what does that look like in practice?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm still figuring out how to articulate that. The moment that I have finished figuring out how to articulate that, the book will be 5 weeks out from release. Um, but I can talk a little bit maybe about the first moment that I really clued into that. And that was around 2013. I was one of the organizers of a group called Terminal City Story Games. It was a weekly drop in role playing game one shot event that was kind of like queer centering, but welcome to everyone, new player centering, but welcome to everyone. And we didn't have a specific fixed venue. What we were doing was 3 hour meetups in a rotating series of coffee shops. Um, and so that situation, it was, 6 to 9 p.m., which is already a really short amount of time. But then you think about the fact that new players, some things about new players. One, they don't really get why role playing game sessions are as long as they are, because you have to have experienced a role playing game before you get why they're 3 to 4 hours long, like at on the short end. Um, it seems like an impossibly long amount of time until you've actually done it. And uh, the other thing is that because it's oh my gosh, I see the comment. I was there in those halcyon days. Yes, you were. You were part of the crew. Um, hi. Uh, One of the things is that if it's in a coffee shop, it is polite for everyone to buy a drink or a brownie or something. And it's polite to not flood the register all at once at 5:55, which means that effectively for the first half hour, maybe even 40 minutes of your 3 hours, people are getting up and leaving, and they're going to get drinks, and they're going to go to the bathroom, and people are running late. And so one of the struggles with this wasn't just what games are playable in 3 hours and welcoming to new players. It was also which games have a teaching and setup process that can accommodate people getting up and walking away for about 5 minutes anywhere during that setup and teaching process. And a lot of games fall apart on that front. We were trying to run Apocalypse World, and and there was someone who was coming who had like a newborn, maybe not like a totally newborn, but a sub 1 year old baby, and so was frequently getting up and standing about 7 feet away from the table to breastfeed, maybe 2 feet away from the table, I don't know. But this question of like, is this game breastfeeding friendly, wasn't something that I had really considered before. Um, Apocalypse World had at the time playbooks that were folded once. And so you have to be able to flip between the different pages, reference a number on one of the pages, pick up dice, and then roll it. And doing that one handed is super hard. The like the act of nursing a child while trying to engage with this interface of a folded piece of paper. I hadn't thought about like the accessibility barrier of that piece of paper being folded before that moment, but then like witnessing this person struggle and then eventually not coming back one of the weeks uh, was really eye-opening to me and made me feel like, oh, I never want to design a game that is not breastfeeding friendly. And that's just like a dimension of design I hadn't considered before that. Um, I think there was a lot of things that drop-in group really opened my eyes to. The degree to which acronyms were excluding people and convincing people that they didn't belong in the space. Um, Role-playing game designers love acronyms and love to use the full word in the entire book, start to finish, and then use an acronym for the word on the character sheet exclusively. Um, and what that does is it drives away potential players. So it reinforces the people who already feel like they belong in the space, feel like they belong in the space even more because they have this weird arcane knowledge that's invisible to them. And the people who are just showing up to give it a try, um, especially for that group, queer people and women, were feeling kind of like repelled away by all these like tiny invisible details. Uh,
Hmm.
so designing uh, outward from the fact that the people who play your games are going to forget things. They're going to have brain fog. They're going to need to pee. They're going to need to eat. They might need to breastfeed. There might be a crying baby. Uh, how does your game confront those variables? Um, that's kind of like the accessibility side of that. What does it mean to design games outward from the human body? Also thinking about just like where role-playing game experiences, where emotional experiences, where stories are held within our bodies and how we express them through our bodies beyond just talking. Um, does that make sense?
Yes, yes. I think that's really, really interesting and informative, and definitely has that kind of um, it speaks to accessibility. It speaks to approachability, which is not the same thing, but related. It speaks to all these things of privilege, of knowledge, of all these things that we take for granted, honestly, especially as designers, because if you are a game designer, you probably like these things. You probably know these things. Like Thaco means something to you if you're of a certain age and you play role-playing games, right? So I think that's really interesting. There's a whole literacy of in game playing that you'd think is natural, but it's not because it's constructed, right? Play is not constructed. Play is a natural phenomenon. It just happens amongst organisms that are interested in this thing, right? But the language and all the things that surround it, all a lot of that is constructed, and we have to understand that the meaning that we get out of that, if you're not privy to it, if you don't have the background knowledge in this type of play, you're going to be wondering, what does D20 actually mean? What does that mean? And then so it's just, oh, it's a 20-sided die. Okay, that's easy. Now, anything with a D and a number is a dice with that number of sides. But if you don't know that, it looks like algebra, like literally like algebra, right? So that's fascinating. So designing from the body outwards is taking a lot of that into account then. Good. I love it.
And yeah, I think a lot of role playing games are built with the assumptions that are inferred from being played at a table, being played with paper, being played with dice, and not a lot are being built outward from the assumptions and affordances of weird, lumpy, uh, sweaty, needy bodies. But every single designer and every single player is bringing one of those to the table.
Hmm. Oh, hello to other people out there. Oh, by the way, while we're here, there's a bunch of people watching, so let's say hi. Hey, Deadpan, how you doing? Hi to Michael. Hi to Wobble, who was one of the people at those one-shot events in Terminal City, which is Vancouver, really, right? Which is where that happened. And hello to Amanda Panda, who's out there watching as well. So Avery, the book, who's the book meant for? Who will benefit from reading said book?
Yeah. So I think that game designers, um, uh, people who have been designing games for years, and first time designers, people who have not yet given themselves permission to call themselves game designers, but have um, been not only playing role playing games, but tweaking things, producing homebrew additions for their game. Um, People who like thinking about narrative structure and storytelling broadly, um, and teachers of intro to game design courses, especially courses that are talking about things like early prototyping, uh, rapid iteration, play-based design, and curiosity-led design.
Love it. And do you think that this is more for role playing designers, LARP designers, or is it could it be equally applicable to people who are into board and card?
I think that I have only ever been a role-playing game designer, uh, and so I'm writing from that perspective. Um, I think that some of the ideas are easily integrated into board game design. I also think, though, that some things that I have really been on a soapbox about within role playing game design spaces in other kind of segments of game design, the game design world, those are already common in core practices. Things like designing through play, things like slap together the quickest possible prototype, get your minimum, viable prototype, and get it to the table and see what breaks. Like that is already part of board game design workflows for a lot more people than it is for role playing game design.
Right.
I know when I've been doing consulting in role playing game design, there's a lot of times where I'm given like people's materials and I'm given 100-page manuscript and I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, there's no character sheet. How could there possibly be 100 pages and none of them are a character sheet? That's the literal only sheet you actually need to play. Well, you need that and probably like a cheat sheet. Um, there are about 2 pages you need to play a game, and neither of those 2 pages are present in this full-length manuscript.
Right.
And so a lot of the time, I'm receiving full books, and I'm asking, has this been play tested ever? Full stop.
Yeah.
And so the book is really targeted at role playing game design principles and also foibles, I guess.
Yeah. And I will tell everybody out there that um, like Avery, I've been doing this for, I don't know, 20 odd years now. And I learn more from books from outside my specific niche of design. So if you're a board game designer, check out some stuff from the RPG world. And if you're an RPG designer, check out some stuff from the board game world because there is a lot of crossover, or video games, or LARP, or field game design, or any of these types of things. You'll find something that'll make it go click. And if you're interested in learning even broader, go to design things or learn from design things that are outside games itself, like architecture, like graphic design, which is obviously quite related in many ways, but it's not. It's totally in its own field, right? Or clothing design, or anything, any design where it's intended for a person to use this thing afterwards. is a
Mhm.
wonderful way to like level up your skills in the area of design that is your bread and butter. So I think this is a good thing to cross pollinate all of these ideas, right?
That's
Um,
definitely true
it-
for me that like it was permaculture design. It was reading about principles of permaculture design that was the most eye-opening for me and the most transformed my design process. Not anything that I read at the Forge or any kind of role-playing game design space. Um, and permaculture is like a sustainable agricultural design ethos. Um, so that's like I feel like within design that's really far afield. But so yeah, I guess I'm just echoing what you said.
no, it's that's great. Like that is totally my exact experience as well. Like I think all the foundational stuff is from the field that I'm working in at the time, right? Whether it's RPGs or tabletop in some way, shape, or form. But it's those lightning bolts that strike me from above that comes from far afield because it's something I've never heard before. And after 20 odd years in the business, it's like you kind of hear a lot of the same things over and over again, like you were saying, Avery. That's what prompted you to write this book in the first place. It's like I've been saying this stuff over and over again. Maybe I should put it into something that people will actually read. But then for you yourself, your inspiration is coming from really far afield because you have such depth of knowledge within the field that you're in, right? So that makes so much sense to me. um in terms of the book, when is it actually coming out, and when can we like see it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, uh, One of the final kind of like key like ethoses that the book is advising for design is to write the book as late as possible in your game design process. Um, Flippantly, like writing the book is the final step before publishing. Um, and a big part of that is that you want to be putting these things into practice. You want to be rehearsing. You want to get to the point and you want to be outlining. You want to be spending, I spend a lot more time on my document skeleton than I do on the actual words that go into that skeleton
Yeah,
afterwards.
that makes sense. It's the
Um,
flow of information.
because by the time I'm sitting down to actually write final drafts, I'm looking to just take dictation on a well rehearsed performance.
I've said that so many times to people. They're like, "How do you write your rules?" And I say, "Well, I just record myself teaching the game, and then
Yeah,
I put it together from that." And another thing that Avery's saying that I also echo is, I don't write rules until the very end. What I do is I make player aids, which is exactly what Avery was saying. You need like a character sheet and a player aid, and you're pretty much ready to go. And in board games, it's the same thing. You just need a player aid that outlines the turn structure, maybe the icons, maybe special moves, whatever. And that's all you really need to play the game. And that's actually easier to change than a rule book because a rule book has to actually make sense back to front. And I think that's the problem. Once you make it so concrete, things kind of get locked in. It's like a sunk cost fallacy situation in some ways, where it's like, I put all that effort into writing it this way. I don't want to change it. I'm going to leave it that way. And so, yeah, a lot of it is don't start writing the book until it's the last thing. So right now you're like living the process.
I have spent a lot of time dancing with this skeleton, and we're gonna slap some meat on it at the final stage.
I just love that picture. I actually wanted to ask you, if it's not too personal, why is the name of your website Buried Without Ceremony? This just comes from the whole skeleton thing you just said.
Yeah. So the story is actually going on I think is going on a walk in the woods with my dog at the time, who uh, found a skull. No, found a bone. I found some kind of animal bone. I don't remember it anymore. It was a long time ago. But was so excited. Was so pleased. This was his favorite thing. It had still some gross meat on it, and so I tried to get it away from him. And eventually, I gave up. I was like, you know what? This is his new joy in life. He loves this bone more than anything. He was so hyper and so excited the entire walk. And we get to the edge of the woods, and I'm thinking, oh God, he's gonna want to drag this like disgusting meaty bone covered in mud into the house. But then I was totally wrong because he just trots off at the edge of the woods, finds a spot, and buries it. And then it's just like, yeah, okay, cool, let's go. So that's where like the very specific words are, but coming from. But what it's referencing for me is the fact that role playing games are just play. We're just having fun with buds, playing make believe. But at the same time, these experiences can be really powerful, really profound, really meaningful. And part of what makes them have that potential is that it's just a game, right? We've got that alibi that allows us to go deeper. And at the end, we sometimes walk away with these like amazing transformative experiences that we don't owe a single thing to. So we have that permission and that freedom to just bury those experiences without any ceremony, without needing to take anything from them. And we also have the permission to let them transform how we see the world.
Amazing. So, Avery, are you self-publishing game design for creatures? Are you going through a publisher?
I am going to be self-publishing so far.
Okay, so you'll let us know when it's ready, so we can tell everybody to go check it out, right? Excellent.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. That is our hour. I can't believe we filled it up so quickly, but Avery's awesome. So there's so much information there. Hopefully, everybody out there, if you're listening, go check out Avery's games, The Quiet Year, Deep Forest. There's so many more out there that you should go check out. A lot of them are, like I said, those indie games that give you a really good, solid experience about a thing or a feeling or whatever it is that isn't like D&D. So if you've never played an indie game and all you ever play is 5e or 3.5 or Pathfinder even or Call of Cthulhu, so any of the systems that are like big dice systems, try out one of these little indie games. I think you might be surprised. Other than that, let's go on with the names here. You can find me on Blue Sky at Sen Feng Lim. Where can people find you, Hafiz?
They can find me on Instagram at Printer Ink Games. And Avery, how about you?
My website is buriedwithoutceremony.com. And then anywhere where I am on social media, it is either at Buried Without Ceremony, or if character limits didn't allow, at Lacking Ceremony.
Oh, I get it. It's kind of the same thing. And if you want to talk to Hafiz and I at the same time, you can reach us at Meeple Syrup on all the things. Hey, Avery, I think Hafiz warned you, but it's now time to give your final advice.
Okay, I mean, I feel like I gave a lot of advice. I feel like we mostly talked about my book my book of advice that I'm writing. And I was like, well, here's the advice from the book. But beyond that, I talked a little bit about kind of like reconnecting with make believe throughout this hour. And so I think my piece of advice is, and this is advice that I'm saying out loud because I'm always trying to take it myself. Give yourself permission to love the things that you loved when you were a child, that along the way somebody shamed you for loving, or along the way you thought that you had to reject those things in order to grow and evolve and continue to transform as a person. Give yourself permission to return to everything you've ever loved.
That's awesome. Very, very, very wise words from Avery. Cool. Everybody, if you want to help keep the lights on, please go to patreon.com/meeplesyrup. And other than that, hey, Hafiz, are we on next week? It is Canada Day.
We are on next week. The week after we won't be. We're taking a bit of a break, but we have Grant Leon from Grant Game Rex is going to be on. We're going to be talking about his new YouTube show, comedy and board games in general, and just how to bring more people into the hobby.
Excellent. That is something I love to talk about. All right, everybody, we will see you here next week. For the Canadians who may be out, you know, at fireworks and things like that, happy Canada Day to you if you celebrate. Um, Avery, thank you so much for coming. It was lovely to talk to you again. Every month, I think I talk to you now, which is wonderful. And I'm looking forward to reading that book. The title alone has grabbed me. So I want to find out more about what you're thinking. Other than that, we'll see everybody in 7 days. See y'all later. Good
Take care,
night.
everyone.